Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. My name is Stephanie Parrish. I'm the Associate Director of Education and Public Programs here at the museum. And it's a great pleasure to have you join us for another installment of Critical Voices. As many of you know, Critical Voices is a lecture series that began almost a decade ago, following the museum's acquisition of the Clement Greenberg collection, one of America's most noted 20th century art critics. The heart of the series is really inspired by Greenberg's role in establishing a robust public dialogue around art and artists and contemporary life. Over the years, Critical Voices has brought a range of nationally and internationally recognized artists, curators, historians, critics, and theorists to Portland for lively conversations. And I want to acknowledge Bruce Gunther, who I know is here, somewhere in the middle there. This lecture series is really a testament to Bruce's tenure at the museum, and it's a great pleasure to have him with us today too. So, about Gary Hill, our speaker today. Born in Santa Monica since the early 70s, Gary Hill has worked with a broad range of media, including sculpture, sound, video, installation, and performance, producing a large body of single-channel videos, mixed media installations, and performances. His longtime work with intermedia continues to explore an array of issues, ranging from the physicality of language, synesthesia, and perceptual conundrums, to ontological space and viewer interactivity. That sounds like a grad school seminar to me. In his bio on Electronic Arts Intermix, they succinctly note, perhaps as much as any artist using image/sound media, Hill's work in video is about and is a new form of writing. He's collaborated with a range of national and international artists and writers, among others, choreographer Meg Stewart, poets George Quasha, Charles Stein, and Chris Mann, musician Bill Frisell, and philosopher Jacques Derrida. During his recent residency at the Pilchuck School of Glass, he created a series of works incorporating language, glass, and video, including a recent acquisition here at the museum called Klein Bottle, with the image of its own making after Robert Morris from 2013. And that work is currently on view on the 4th floor of the Jubit Center, so I encourage you after this talk to go up and take a look at that. He's had major international solo exhibitions at the Barcelona Museum, the Georges Pompidou, the Psychedelic Museum, and in the United States, at the Guggenheim, SF MoMA, the Hirshhorn, and the Henry up in Seattle. So we are honored to welcome Gary Hill. He is based in Seattle, so he just had a short train ride down here. Please join me in welcoming him to talk on Cutting Corners Creates More Sides.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. Welcome to a nice Sunday afternoon, I guess. Typically, I improvise these talks, and this one is really no different, but I decided to start with the work that was acquired here a little while ago. And let's see. An image on the screen, even though it's upstairs on the 4th floor. There we go. It's called Klein Bottle with the image of its own making after Robert Morris. And the piece that Robert Morris did was called A Box with the Sound of Its Own Making, which was very inspirational for me when I was pretty young. It was made in the late 60s. And I see this work as kind of certainly a homage to that work, using a form, a Klein bottle, which is really a generic topological form. It's nothing that I created by any means. And especially in relationship to a box, it has a much more, say, ambivalent form. There is no let's say the inside and the outside are ambiguous. It's generally thought of as a continuous surface. So anyway, and then in terms of the relationship of the image to the sound, an image is typically more complex than a sound, and therefore just trying to kind of parallel the idea of a more complex geometric form with a more complex recording of the making of that. So over time, when you look at this, when you view this work, it changes colors. You can see what's going on. You see it being made in a glass stove, and depending on whether they're firing it up or you see the outside landscape of where it was made, it changes colors based on the environment and or what is happening in the making of it. But it basically looks at all the segments of the making, the melting of the glass, the entire thing, basically. So anyway, what I decided to do today, this afternoon in my hotel room anyway, is to look at the sequence of works as a kind of organic development, or from actually looking at a Klein bottle and what that is, and the notions of this surface that is neither outside or inside, and just go to the next work that I felt was kind of related to this in my development. And certainly one of them would be a piece called Learning Curve. Wave forms, waves are very much, have that sense of not really an inside and an outside, and they're continuously becoming forms. I grew up surfing, and it's been a very influential practice, kind of part of my life that has informed a lot of works very directly, very literally, and probably most of the works in some kind of metaphorical way. So this one's called Learning Curve, having to do with a kind of obvious practice versus praxis, I guess. Studying versus experience. It may have to do with I didn't go to school, so I looked at it, the school chair, a little differently. This is for right-handers, and I'm left-handed, so I decided to make a kind of related work for a left-handed person. And although difficult to see here at the end of the approximately 20-foot tabletop is a continuous forming wave, but from the side angle, so you actually see the tube curling over rather than frontally. I should actually point out, this is kind of a little story on this other, on the learning curve itself. The wave you see there, it's about 3-second loop, but it's fairly seamless. And at that time, it was quite difficult to find a perfect wave, and I even made a request to Bruce Brown, who made The Endless Summer, which had a break in it called Cape St. Francis in the south of Africa. And waves were so perfect, they looked like they were almost still. But I didn't hear anything from him, so I decided to just steal it. And this is a a kind of cropped in a little inside wave from the footage of Cape St. Francis. I don't think you would really mind, but anyway. So, and that's kind of why I called the second one Learning Curve Still Point, but having more to do with a kind of philosophical notion of a still point. In that sense, the way a wave becomes And when you enter what is known as the green room or get inside of a wave, there's a moment at which kind of time stops and you're just there, something like a still point. So this is something I've never shown publicly before. I mean, at least after I made them 40 years ago. These are steel sculptures made of copper-coated steel welding rod. However, these have been painted, and I've used wire mesh. And I know it seems very out of context right here, but this is actually called point conception, and it's meant to be a kind of wave maker, and it's a reference to a surf spot on Hollister Ranch in Northern California, again where the waves on a good day are considered perfect. And so just trying to point out to you that I was definitely obsessed and still am with the practice and the thought of what surfing actually is. If you can read that. So somewhere between then and now, I came across this quote: Heidegger surfboards along on the electronic wave as triumphantly as Descartes wrote the mechanical wave, which I find very revealing and useful for my purposes anyway. Suddenly, I'm not a Heideggerian or anything, but I've touched upon his works, and there is something kind of electronic about it. By the same token, I also have thought about, because of having the other influence upon my life, or one of the others, psychotropic experiences of various kinds, thinking about the difference between a person such as John C. Lilly, who grew up and immersed himself near the sea, and Heidegger, who was born landlocked and more into the sort of Black Forest rooted idea of language and philosophy. And I actually wrote a kind of a beginning text about this because I found it very interesting that, in fact, that could very well affect their ways of thinking and being. Well, I'll just let this play and then I'll talk about it. But it has to do with a thought, how thinking comes into being.
This, that, and the other thing. Things. Things are going to happen. Happenstance. Standing in the thick of things, like sticks in the mud. That's beside the point. The issues at hand are other things. This is not going to be a song and dance. That's entertainment. Another thing. This is something I came upon while walking in the woods. That's ground for thinking through other things. Things are going to happen in a moment's notice. Standing in a mummy's tomb, thought-provoked, dumbstruck by the momentum of a tree, the gnarled character of its being, the way it visits the temples and the groin, teaching the body-mind to be taught to talk with your mouth open. The words are coming. Listen to them. Nothing surrounds them. They are open. They speak of nothing but themselves with perfect reason. I am talking them out into the open. They sit like deer in a field. If I approach them too quickly, they fade into the quick of things. Silence is always there. There is silence when I stop to take a breath, when I see breathtaking things.
So I just decided to choose this because of the, oh, wait a second, yeah, because that motif in the beginning of Happenstance reminded me of the title of a show I recently had called Of Surf, Death, Tropes, and Tableaus, the Psychedelic Gedanken Experiment. And this was a series of works that were very much tied to the notions, the world of basically LSD. And they centered on a main work, which was called the Psychedelic Gedanken Experiment. See here. Okay. And in this work, it was recorded in 3D, and there's a 3D projection at one end of a large space, and on the opposite end is a 2D projection, but differentiated by it's a recording of the original recording of me, let's say, giving a lecture, a kind of manifesto, if you will. And the 3D one has been reversed to correct the 2D one. And by correction, I mean I did it backwards, the voice and the movement. I have some examples here, so you'll get what I mean, because it's difficult to explain. Also, in this slide here, on the lower right corner, which you can see better here, the chairs that one sits in are kind of hard, soft foam, and they are 2D renders of the molecular structure of LSD. I don't mean to make it all about LSD or anything, but I have to explain what it is. So let's see here. This is another image of the 3D. And this is a image of the score or text that I wrote to perform this, kind of an inventive phonemes and scoring of the letters so that I would know how to say them. Because it's not quite like reading backwards. In fact, it's like sound. It's exactly like sound. And these were the older-fashioned 3D glasses that were handed out for the exhibition. I have a 10-year-old computer here because my daughter's computer fell apart, and I had to send her my nice little Mac Air. And now I'm just looking for my mouse. There it is. So here is, I'm not sure if this is going to be backwards or forwards, but we'll know soon enough. Maybe I have to press something. Here we go. So this is the backwards, but it is starting from, this is the beginning, but it was recorded backwards. This is a kind of an origami table that I had made so that when it's unfolded and you see it from a kind of lower perspective, it's corrected into a rectangle rather than a triangle. I did have some difficulty getting the gloves off, but anyway. And the background here is a computer-generated anechoic chamber, which I thought was a apropos environment for the psychedelic experiment to take place in. So in fact, I am putting them on, of course. So. I mean, you would find this out eventually anyway, but those little pieces of plastic and metal on the floor eventually come together, through my taking it apart, of course, into a molecular model of LSD. See if I can go forward here a little bit. It's quite the... Oh, I'm going to speak soon, so I'll just let it go.
I'm taking the liberty as artists to declare lysergic acid diethylamide LSD as the art experience par excellence, although originally discovered somewhat accidentally and then synthesized by the scientist Albert Hoffman. I'm claiming the psychoactive event itself as a work of art in the tradition of the found object, a la Marcel Duchamp. In this case, it's perhaps closer to a found performance.
Anyway, it takes some concentration. But basically, it's a kind of ambiguous manifesto in the sense that a Gedanken experiment is really a hypothetical one in the sense that one doesn't actually have to do the experience. So in the text, I claim as an artist that the psychotropic experience of LSD, I claim it as a performance, and that in due time, it will be considered one of the most powerful works of art of all time. And then I basically give bullet points, 15 or 20 or so, of why I think that is. For example, experiencing the interconnectedness of all things, that you have a complete epistemological reset, things of this nature that I don't really find true with other works of art. So here is, if I can find my mouse again. Let's see. There it is. So here, I believe, is the other way, so you get an idea of the process of the making of. I probably have to do that.
Nemritskenik nadveg. Kiledakias of va. Skitsru urkerek. Of va mas erdnap stel. Kies naserepmak. Erof. Tra murf. Now. Namid. You would tow. I retiark of Ibdu. To. La. Ta. Jdudj. Ib. Ilbasa. Du. Tra. Tav. Nimusa.
Anyway, another language. I did hear the word judged in there, it's a very difficult word to say. So along with that work were 3 or 4 other works. This one is called Beauties in the Eye, and it consists of, well, 3 components, I suppose. On the left is a stereo image, 3D image, I guess, of myself in a kind of get up. What can I say? And you'll see more closer, but and I'm giving out very individual flowers to people who walk up to me. You know, really hippie kind of thing, you know. And that's the viewer is in the middle, and there's edited images of the people who are walking up to me. So it's kind of happening across the room. Also, you probably noticed in the middle of the floor there is a image of a bicycle laying down, and that is a kind of representation of Albert Hoffman's bicycle that he could no longer ride when he took his first substantial LSD trip and started to ride home. He had to lay it down and keep going. So this is just another view of that image. And still another. So all the works kind of played off of each other, I guess you could say. My wife, Magdalena, who is here with our newborn child somewhere, helped me construct this get-up. And here are some individuals taking the flowers. You know, flowers, you know, you look at them and they have that kind of infinite depth that you can never really exhaust. This is the performance artist, Carole Schneemann. And I knew she would take that flower. And she did, sure enough. So, a couple more. This is another work, part of the same show, which is called Exacting Light. And sure enough, that is a larger molecular model of LSD, and the images on the walls are MRIs of my brain. And I mean, it's very difficult to take a photograph of this work because there's strobe lights that they don't really strobe, they just go on once very briefly while I'm saying a text, one word or one phrase of the text, which kills any image that's on the walls, and then they have to kind of fade in as you become used to the darkness, because the projections are from monitors, black and white tube monitors with lenses which have a very different kind of quality to projectors that we see today. So here's some close-ups of... I did make an appointment to do this under the influence, but I chickened out. I just thought it would be too claustrophobic, you know. But they do sort of... This is all 8 of them that were in the room. So let's see here. And this is a body scan. So the the last work in the show is called kind of going back to earlier in the talk. It's called Isolation Tank, which is a device that John Lilly invented in the 50s, I think, which is a tank that you, it's the same temperature as your body, and you float in water that has salt in it so that you float. And there is no sound, and it's completely dark, so that the idea is that your physicality separates from mind. So this is, it's called Isolation Tank, and I'll just play it, or at least I hope I will. Let's see what happens. Here we go. I mean, it's not an enclosed tank, it's kind of an inversion of the isolation tank. Well, for whatever reason, that was silent, but it actually has sound of a helicopter. So it basically returns to C and then plays again. If you don't know if you noticed, but there was a kind of a decal on the surfboard, and most people don't really notice that it's moving. And this is actually what the decal is. And it's a morph from a very simplistic drawing of my face to a Buddhist Mahakala, which is, among other things, kind of an ego killer. And that's what's on fiberglass of the surfboard. It's kind of like that image in Blade Runner that someone tells you about later. Anyway, you get the gist of it. So I'm going to go backwards again here. Most of these sort of, I don't know, references that I've been or referred to or been inspired by or what have you. One of the central things for me in working with electronic media and myself is feedback. And this piece is called Glass Onion. It's also from, I don't know, 1981 or something like that. And it's basically almost like a portrait of feedback. The four monitors on the outside, there's a text that runs kind of around the room. And then these black boxes in the middle, they're speakers, and four of them represent channels 1, 3, and 5, and the outer ones are 2, 6, and 8, or something along those lines. And then the monitor in the middle, which is facing up, is it's all live. There's a camera on the ceiling which is continually zooming in and out. So when it's all the way in, it's creating a feedback of itself, and when it's all the way out, it frames the space and whoever happens to be in the work. And that image is switching between positive and negative as it goes around the four monitors. I'll explain why I refer to a work done in 1981 that you see it on flat screen LCD images now. So this is the text of the entire work, which is a description of feedback. I'm just going to read it, even though it's right in front of you. A texture is drawing a continuum from one voice to another, differentiated by measuring the distance between sending and receiving messages, voicing the following. Rectilinear time enfolds the negative and positive spaces, expanding the image. That text occupies the space before and after the frame of reference within a rectangle. Now, the way that this is actually heard in the piece is a kind of chanting, and it kind of backs up into itself. It's not backwards, but the structure of it is mathematical. So the beginning as such, there would be a single rectangle on that monitor on the floor, and you would be hearing rectangle, 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 and at some point there would be a rectangle within a rectangle, and you would hear both rectangle, rectangle, and for every 2 times you would hear that, you would hear within a rectangle. So one has 3 syllables and one has 6. So it keeps sort of doubling up like that. So when it comes to the end, you're hearing that many voices saying rectangle in unison. So the phrases are, I won't tell you all of them, but rectangle within a rectangle, the frame of reference within a rectangle, that text occupies the space before and after the frame of reference within a rectangle, and so on. So while this is happening, you're seeing more and more rectangles within rectangles, or less and less. It kind of goes back and forth and builds a structure that way. So, again, there's the piece. Here's the monitor on the floor. There's not that many voices, but at some point it's quite cacophonous and it sort of goes its own way. Now here's a the first time this piece was shown, which was in Seattle in 1981, I think. And that's what I was talking about. These are vacuum tube monitors, but otherwise it's pretty much exactly the same, except that in the back room, in this case, there's about an 8-foot wall of handmade electronics that are panning the sound, panning the images, the camera is controlling the zoom and everything. And in the current refabricated version, that's all on a computer. And this is actually a subject matter. It's not really, well, it is interesting to me, but it's more interesting to museums and people who collect such artifacts. And there are some who want the original material, think of that as what the piece is. I, on the other hand, feel that that has really nothing to do with the work. It's more akin to perhaps a musical score, and one uses the most available and what makes the most sense for the work now. So anyway, that's kind of an aside. It does create a lot of heated discussion and panels all over the world. Let's see here. I have a little blank thing here. It could be just black, or it could be a moving image. I guess we'll find out. It's black. So now I'm remembering where I was. I'm thinking again on feedback and electronic media and how one enfolds themselves in this kind of cybernetic milieu space, what have you. This is a work called Inasmuch as It Is Always Already Taking Place. And this is about, I think it's 5 or 6 feet wide and 1.5 feet tall opening, but it's about 5 or 6 feet deep. And there are 16 vacuum tube monitors ranging from 1/2 inch to 23 inches. And they are parts of my body that are more or less actual size based on the size of the monitor. But the cybernetic aspect comes into this where these are not so much frames taken with the eye, like chosen or as compositionally or just imagistically, but rather in a situation, I have a camera on me and I have actually a foot pedal set up that I can grab a still frame, which is then I'm monitoring mixed with the live camera. So all the images here range from about 15 seconds to perhaps a little over a minute. And that represents the moment that I grab a frame and then I slowly move my body to relocate that frame, meaning all the little hairs and pimples and whatever, so that it's exactly the same frame. So that represents a kind of loop. So instead of being an image where it starts somewhere, goes a certain distance, and then jumps back, the end is the same as the beginning, and you have a kind of rhythmic, polyrhythmic undertone to the whole work, although it looks quite still until you come upon it. It also has a kind of low-level sound of parts of speech and debris and skin and paper and this kind of thing. This is a close-up. Closer still. And then we're going to jump to that residency I did about 2 years ago, I guess now. I can't believe it's 2 years, well, 1.5 years, I guess, at the Pilchuck Glass School, where I did this work, which is called Inasmuch as It Has Already Taken Place, which I saw as kind of like a ghost or a trace of a previous artwork. So this is a fairly truthful parallel in terms of the actual size of the box, but it's kind of set up as a kind of excavation, I suppose. And then the glass tubes are pretty much the same size as the original, inasmuch as it is always already taking place. But there are no images, there are no wires. They're gone. But I haven't become a glass artist. Let me be perfectly clear. It was fun while it lasted. So these are just different views of this object. And this one's kind of curious. On the surface, I put this, I think it's like a glass from coral, a special coral that's on the surface that absorbs light, and then when it's dark, it is sort of effervescent, or fluorescent, I should say. And another work I did there, which probably makes a little more sense. It's called Alodia Pyram. Do you know what that means? That's good, because it's a made-up word. So what happened is that, in fact, this is how I ended up making anything. I went there. They asked me if I wanted to be a resident there, and I said, well, I'll do it as long as I don't have to make anything. I don't want to have any, kind of pressure. And so I saw, when I went there was all these people throwing things away that they were making, and they made a mistake, and they throw them in these buckets or, bins, and incredible shapes of, shards, broken and sharp and round and just stuff, So I just started taking it. I mean, I wasn't choosy, I just took it all, kind of. And I laid it out in my space and decided to make up a language, not on any scientific level whatsoever at all. It was very intuitive, but there's something there we can't really know. It started to make a lot of sense after a while. There'll be close-ups here. There's about 300 pieces on this tabletop that's 10 by 20 feet, I believe. I think the next one you can actually see words. But anyway, after a while, I would look at these things, shards, and the word, and they started to make sense to me somehow. And I wonder that's just how it works. And I thought of doing, I'm supposed to do a show in Italy, and I proposed showing this, and they weren't into it so much. But I'm not sure if that was because, well, that's not video, or whatever they think, But then I started thinking how interesting it would be to have a fairly sophisticated Italian poet translate this into his notion of this made-up speech with these objects and what would happen. It's really curious to me, actually. I mean, like that Papelix, I can't imagine it being anything else but that thing there. And there's Alodia. Hello. Yeah. So, and that Visagal, that's fairly suggestive. So now, this is kind of related, but I had to put it in here because that's what I called this talk. Cutting corners creates more sides. So that's what this is called. And you can't tell anything by this, but there's two projectors, and they're projecting these images of, I'll show you in a second. Well, I'll just show you now. This. So this is in my studio, and it's just stuff that ranges from dust, dirt, little tiny nothingness, to perhaps the size of a chair. And I have two macro zoom lenses on these cameras here that I set up so that at certain points in the depth, they would construct a horizontal completion. It would be it would make sense horizontally, or they would go together. In other words, like crossing at various points. And there's about 40 or 50 slices of focus, because the depth of field, there is no depth of field. So it's all about this very abstract places of focus. And it's the rhythm of the edit is to a text. And I think I'll read you some of that, because you'll get it just more that way somehow. Spinning ball. Well, while that thing is spinning, this reminds me of a piece I have in the back of my head. It's coming. It's an internet work. God, that really sounds awful to me, but anyway. It has to do with, I did a number of pieces where there's a fairly short scene or recording, seconds long perhaps, 5 seconds or something. And it gets elongated by more and more, but mathematically more and more, black being injected in. So rather than this being like a strobic image, because there's no images that are missing. In other words, the next time the image comes back after the black, it comes back where it left off. So basically it just slows down, and slows down very quickly. And I did a work called Blind Spot, which was this Algerian just stepping out of his house and walking up the street, and I'm following him, and he sees me and flips me the finger, and that's the whole piece, but it lasts 11 minutes, because by the end, you're waiting about 1.5 minutes to get the next frame. So I thought of extending this to, outer space time, right? So if you imagine like a recording of skipping a stone on water, and it getting divided by that kind of time, so that at some point very soon, the next frame is going to come a week from now, or a month, or a year. So rather than the image being so important, it's the announcement of the coming of, and there might be a party, for instance, that people get together to see the next frame. So this just, goes out into time. So, when the 10-year anniversary comes, God, it's going to be an event, right? The next frame we will see. And maybe that will be the one where the rock actually touches the surface. Anyway, so my cutting corners creates more sides just came up, but I want to find a little place, a little more maybe. So, there's, okay. Here's a little place, I guess. I really need a lot of water when I do this. So remember, we're looking at these abstract images. Sometimes you see a wire or a tool or something, but it's fairly much of an abstract landscape. And it's changing based on kind of the rhythm of my speech. So, a glorious evening sky added to the celebration of the human ingenuity that lay before me. Giddy abandonment was palpable as the ultramarine splendor found its cradle in the depth of waiting blackness. The velvety canopy transformed visibility into an infinite space of vertiginous possibilities. As night sparkled, my focal point began shifting from one extreme to the other, scrutinizing the view more thoroughly. Given the aura of calmness, why was there not a single plane taking flight, landing or taxiing? Instead, a menagerie of aerodynamic beauties passively stood looking like arrowheads, randomly pointing in all directions. Service vehicles and miscellaneous support machinery were also idle and silent. What made the situation all the more strange was the absolute stillness of the air itself, and yet it wasn't stale in any sense. It was strangely odorless and innocent, intoxicatingly so. I found myself taking deep breaths, each one deeper than the last, as if supplementary oxygen had been pumped into my whereabouts. By now, the clarity of the night could only be described as magnificent. The abundance of stars looked more like scattered sand or bits of crystal perfectly attuned to that one unseen oscillator that sings at a fever pitch. Everything was perfectly still and exquisitely placed as if by a giant hand. Perhaps it was a secret project, which for whatever reason had to be abandoned. But this explanation failed too, as clutter, debris, and heaps of scrap and broken glass were all absent. On the contrary, the place looked immaculate and strangely calculated. Was it camouflaging, a simulacrum of something perhaps sinister or even more fantastical? A stealth site of some kind, a place made invisible by proprietary logarithms that I had inadvertently broken the code of. The thought was frightening and queerly exhilarating. Already the adrenaline was coursing my veins. The atmosphere changed dramatically. I could feel a kind of acceleration taking place. I watched my own eyesight rapidly destabilize. Every aspect of my vision was being tested. What moments ago was virtually akin to a still photograph, however mysterious, was revealing itself as a bizarre construction with elaborate riggings, controls, mechanisms, and massive decoys. I was beginning to perspire and feel ill. I could no longer triangulate the two images that were now flying directly into my pupils. Waves of light moved over the scene like fast-moving clouds. Things were transforming back and forth between opaque physical entities and layers of diaphanous light. My depth of field wasn't helping matters. Occluding one object from another was increasingly difficult. Perception was being absorbed by my vision, was that of a tired body being swallowed by quicksand. Anyway, it's a kind of self-reflexive text in which you, as you're watching these images, they begin to kind of take on, parallels to what I'm talking about, even having to do with your own kind of vision. Okay. So typically, I don't know where I am now. Not every time, but typically. I start with a work. It's called Around and About. And I thought I would just finish with that work today, just because it's different. But it really is a work that kind of frames sort of this kind of situation, like kind of a dialogue, I guess you could say. And it's one of the first works that allowed me out of a kind of vortex of the electronic space of video. Basically, it was one of the works where I started to speak reflexively about what was going on. So I'll just go ahead and play that. See it there.
I'm sure it could have gone another way, a completely different way, a way that hasn't ever come to mind, but that's a given. One can never observe all the possibilities and still go on to the next. Sometimes one just exits and enters again. I think I can agree with myself that it's not a matter of choice. You might think that agreeing is a kind of choice, even a blatant choice, but that's not all you're interested in either. There's another determining factor, and that's what we have to concentrate on. At least I do. I agree, it's easy to get sidetracked. It's not even that there's a lot going on. We're just busy. I mean, it's not complicated. You can go on, I can go on. We can assume there's something happening or not something happening. I don't know. Perhaps it's unfair to go on. Maybe we should take our minds off it, think about something else. Maybe it's not worth thinking about at all, but that leads to other things just as problematic. Maybe it should be more complicated. We're looking at it too simply. Look, we don't have to consider all the possibilities, but instead really complicate one, if that's what you want to do. I don't know. Maybe it's my fault. I came unprepared. I'm not ready to be complex. I don't think that's the answer, though. I don't think it's an answer we're looking for. In certain ways, that's probably obvious by now, even knowing that you're a little uneasy with it, and I am too. But I think it's a way I can work with now, and maybe you can, and maybe you can't. I mean, I'm thinking about that. There's time involved here, and it's yours as much as mine. I certainly don't want to threaten your time or make you feel you have to be decisive, yet I want you to be here. I mean, I assume you are here, but I don't want to back you into a corner, and by the same token, I don't want to start from that corner. That's a particular relationship I would like to put aside for now. I know this isn't free of bullshit. I mean, I'm coming from somewhat of a self-conscious place. It's a kind of stacking. I mean, the ideas just pile up but aren't interwoven. They're not connected or disconnected. It's a thought, at least. I can see it. Disembodied ideas being thrown against a wall. But that isn't fair. That isn't fair for me or you. That really kind of loads things down, and that's not my intention. I can assure you of that. I want you to be with me. I mean, you don't have to listen, just hear me out. I don't want you to be involved in deciphering anything, but then that's your prerogative, and I don't want to get in your way. There's something that can be said for that, and I hear you, but I don't want to listen to it. I realize it's easy for one to say that I'm being ambiguous, but I don't think so. I mean, if you want to leave, you can do that, or you can just turn off. I'm not trying to say I'm indifferent. I just think there's a way here. Maybe you really do hear me, and I'm going on, but we have to continue for some time. I mean, I think that's part of it. It would be easy to stop at this point. It would just be interesting and over and possibly boring, but that isn't even the issue. It's important that we go on. This is the way I think it has to be right now. If it wasn't this, it would be that. And there's still this area we have to get through so that the this and the that won't become significant to this. I mean, what I am talking about isn't important in that way that importance draws attention. You might even think this is a game of some sort, but really, you've tried ways that were adjacent to this one when you weren't thinking about the consequences. You may even have heard this before in so many words, but I want to go on. I'm not interested in this kind of talking. It has its purpose, but it can get very sticky. I would rather settle with you, some way that's non-reversible, a way of being with you when it's the only way. When I arrived here, I had no way of knowing it would be this way. I thought about it a lot in the beginning. I tried different ways of thinking of you, what your response would be, and that has to be considered now, too. I've never lost sight of that. I don't think there's been a loss of anything. It's just that I haven't been accumulating things for me or you. There's always time for a sense of urgency. I want to avoid that for now. I don't know, though. Maybe you're waiting for that, waiting and listening.
I guess we're going to have some questions and answers or something like that. Thank you.
Are there any questions? You have a microphone, so we'd love for you to talk into it.
Thank you. How do you separate your earlier body of work that is LSD influence from religious magical thinking?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that again?
How do you separate your earlier body of work influenced by LSD from religious magical thinking?
I don't know. I don't really think about. I don't know what religious means. It's all pretty magical to me. I don't really separate earlier work from later work in terms of. I mean, I don't take LSD to make work or anything like that. Well, that's not totally true, but. Yeah, that's all kind of. You have to be more specific, I guess. That's those words are so big. I mean, it's like asking me what love is or something.
Well, to be specific, when you assign numbers to the letters, and when you assign numbers to the letters, in the practice of Kabbalistic gematria or Eastern Buddhist thought, that seems to have, you made a reference there to a mandala. Clearly a Tibetan Buddhist, how do you separate your body of work from those religious practices?
I don't, but I don't attach it to them either. Like, I used that Buddhist Mahakala because, well, my wife's a Buddhist, and she told me about this, and I thought, well, that's kind of interesting, and with regards to what I'm doing in this work. But it's not something that I, like I'm trying to spread the word of Buddhism or number games or palmistry or, I mean, I've used written texts that are, could be considered in the realm of Maurice Blanchot or Jacques Derrida, but I'm not really a philosopher in that sense, even though one can see that there's relationships, but it's not like I'm trying to underline something. My practice is highly untheoretical, even though it may at times seem highly theoretical. For the most part, it really comes from sort of daily life of bumping into shit, I mean, I did a work called Hand Heard once, which just came from, I was, hanging out and I was like this or something, and, I started looking at my hand and like when I said how, when you look at flowers or something like this, how you can never really kind of exhaust or find you can't complete the perception, you can't complete the experience. And it's really the same for your hand too, like if you just keep looking at it, it just goes on and on and on, And and I recorded this, tried to record this, and then I looked at it later, and it looked really stupid to me. Like, God, this is ridiculous. What am I doing? And so I put it on the shelf or something, and I ended up doing another work. It's called Withershins. That has to do with left and right-handedness and left and right brainness, and I don't want to get into discussion about brain and mind right now, anyway. And that was like a work tape that I inadvertently used, and then 6 months later, I'm looking at this image again, and it's ringing true somehow. I saw it for what it was, and very quickly made a work by recording a number of people looking at their hands for a half hour. It's there's no kind of way to say that this equals that, or art is kind of an act of faith, really. You sort of, it's not even belief or non-belief, it's just that you do things that because your body, your mind says that it just needs to be manifested because you want it to be. And there's no rationale, really. It just is what it is. And I suppose that's probably some Buddhist doctrine of some kind.
One thing you pointed out several times with your works of the 80s, 81 and 82, was how analog they were and how they were vacuum tube TVs, and the video you showed us was analog. What kind of changes did you make in your work when digital things became available?
When what things came in?
Digital things became available.
Well, it's not like a situation where, digital. What can I do with digital? I'm not very state of the art. It may look like that sometimes, and some people probably think that, God, this stuff's so complicated, et cetera, but, I almost always use a consumer camera when I use a camera, which is rare, because I'm much more interested in the immediacy and the closeness of what I can do right there rather than the production value or, digital high resolution, HD. It's not that I can't imagine using these under very particular situation if it arises. I don't know what that situation is. But for the most part, I kind of just use what is necessary at the time, and it's not like it's like sort of like which came first, the horse or the cart or something like this, There's nothing particularly magic about analog. But maybe there is, and that has to do again with that kind of, is analog something where you can't exhaust the frequency of it because it's not represented by numbers. Now, I'm not one that, that's not really how I think, but it's possible. There's, that's an argument that I hear all the time in all walks. In the music world, people are always talking about, recording on analog tape now because it does something to transients that digital recordings can't do, and this kind of thing. But to get back to your question, I do think that the future of I can't even really say art anymore. It's kind of doesn't make sense anymore, really. But the future of making things that makes a difference, that gives people other kinds of experiences that perhaps can feed into their lives, is probably has something to do with interactive media. But there's a lot of really bad interactive media, but there's a lot of bad everything, right? But I think that's really a space that it is digital, it is a space that is necessary, and that's probably where it's going to happen. I mean, it's not going to happen in painting, okay? It's just not possible. Some people will think it is, but anyway, so, yeah.
Any other questions?
Thank you for your talk. You mentioned cybernetics, systems, complexity, a whole host of terms, both science and art. And your work has always been a great inspiration to me over many, many years.
Thank you.
Yeah. One of the terms you've used in your work over time has been the word metamedia in one way or another, or metamedium in one way or another. And I was wondering if you could elaborate how that term, how that idea has informed your work over the years.
I don't really use the term metamedia, but I can understand maybe meta, like as in metaphor. What is a metaphor? No, I mean, I think that it has to do with, well, a simple way for me to understand it is you know, most people don't really even understand the difference between, say, video, which is electronic. It can be very cybernetic. It can be very meta, and film. Okay, you know, it's almost now everyone, you know, it's a camera. You edit and you do this thing and whatever, you know. But with video, like for instance, he has a camera here. It's live. That there could be a monitor over here, anywhere, multiple. And I could see myself the way he's looking at me. And I would then be in a triangulated live situation where I'm thinking about that. That's meta. And that just gets extended in many different ways. And more complexity. You could have meta, you know. So, in fact, the very first time I used video was by happenstance, really. I knocked on the door of a place called Woodstock Community Video in Woodstock, New York. Had just moved up from New York City. It was called People's Video Theater there. And I just, what is this? It was just an innocent question. And the director, his name's Ken Marsh, pulled out a Portapack, the earliest Portapack, and showed me how to use it and just sat me down and said, play. So I started playing with it. I recorded myself. And then I asked him, do you have another Portapack? So I could play back what I recorded and then record myself with the playback. So that's what cybernetics and meta kind of thing is, I think, you know.
Working with glass.
Well, I didn't really work too much with it. I thought about it, and other people did the work. No, I mean that's the truth. They wanted me to try and blow a thing, you know, so I did that, and they made fun out of me and stuff. So I had people. They, you know, part of that residency is that there's people who know what they're doing, that they'll do what you ask them to do. It's a great situation. So I've never had the, you know, that romantic thing of, you know, sticking the pipe in the big stove and blowing glass. I think it's a very difficult thing to work with because it's such a beautiful thing just as it is. I made another work there, which I didn't show you. Well, actually, it's right here. That was kind of a flash idea while I was there, which was I made renditions of Fat Boy and Little Man, the atomic bombs that were dropped on Japan. And they were yeah, I don't know. I mean, it was kind of interesting to make something that's so destructive out of glass, that's so vulnerable, and it can be broken very easily. In fact, we made an extra one and did a performance of dropping it from a 3-story building and recording it with a high-speed camera. It caused a little bit of a problem because it was in the old Japan town. Someone made some thing out of this, but anyway, I thought as an anti-war statement, but evidently they thought that was very, very bad. It's about 30, between 30 inches and 3 feet, something like that long. There's a couple of them, yeah. But yeah, somebody blew it, and then they do something called the cold work, which is where they put the fins on. It's a pretty expensive medium to work in if you are thinking of weird ideas. So, yeah.
So thank you very much, Gary.
Thank you.